Hello! Okay, this was a very long post, so instead of making you slog through it, I decided I would make a little video so that you can all have a look and see what it's like to be talking as me. So maybe in the future, when you're reading my post, you'll be able to hear what I sound like in your head. So in advance, I'm very sorry about that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Shavuot. This is ostensibly the law being given to the children of Israel, and apparently about cheesecake. But, as I found out, neither of these things were really important during my observation of the actual festival. By 5:30 p.m. on Monday, I was so bored that I could have torn my eyes out. 36 hours after starting Yom Tov rules, I'd read the whole Torah, more or less, the Book of Ruth, some of the Book of Acts, and 1.5 Harry Potters. I was trying to be as pious as I could and read about Jewish law being passed down from God to Moses to the Israelites, but it turned out that, on the surface at least, there was not much to it. God seemed to be concerned, at the back end of Exodus and Leviticus anyway, in how people prayed to him, what you did with your slaves, compensation culture, and what you need to sacrifice, and who you can and can't have sex with. This stuff is repeated several times in Numbers and then in Deuteronomy, so we really get the point. Now, some of this stuff is really interesting to me as a lawyer. The commandment, for instance, that says, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbour." The translations seem really committed to this wording, and the neighbour part also appears in the Hebrew. The point that I'm making is that this is the basis of the modern idea of witness statements, of swearing oaths, and the grave offence of perjury. Having read it again, I feel less and less as though this relates to lying in general, only the lies that you might tell when asked about someone else's behaviour in a formal setting. This may seem like quite a narrow reading, but when you look at some of the other commandments, you start to get a feel for just how specific some of them are. This quote: "If a bull gores a man or woman to death, the bull is to be stoned to death, and its meat must not be eaten, but the owner of the bull will not be held responsible. If, however, the bull has had the habit of goring and the owner has been warned but has not kept it penned up, and it kills a man or a woman, the bull is to be stoned and its owner is also to be put to death." Exodus 21, verses 28 and 29. This is brilliant! If we substitute bull for worker, and man for employer, then what we have here is actually a very crude version of employer's liability. It's so very modern to say that some things are outside of our control, but if we've been warned about them and ignored them, then we can be held liable. That's why, when I tripped over a paving stone outside King's Cross Station and emailed Transport for London to let them know, then the pavement was fixed within a week. It's all biblical. However, once I'd gotten over my initial excitement of the legal side of Judaism, it began to repeat and repeat. I've been told since that this is on account of having to explain more about the whys and wherefores after the initial rule-giving part. Problem was that, on Sunday, when I was reading this, I couldn't Google for help or explanation. And why? Because Saturday evening marked the beginning of a two-day Jewish Yom Tov, which is a good day or festival, which means I was not allowed to work, which included Wikipedia, turning the lights on, and cooking. No, wait, I take that back. I was in fact allowed to cook, but I was not allowed to light a flame, so if I wanted to use my gas hob, I needed to make sure that the ignition was not going to catch, and that I lit everything from an existing flame. Luckily, Jews make long-lasting candles, and Rivka sent me off with an armful when we were making Shavuot treats at her house on Thursday. We were both feeling a bit unwell, or a lot unwell, as I found out later that Rivka had spent the entire holiday in bed with flu, which she thought was bloody marvellous. But we still managed to bake some cheesy snacks. And then, on Saturday, I made my obligatory cheesecake, which you can see on the website. But why cheese? There are various theories around this, including one that states that the Israelites were given dietary laws, but before that they didn't know what they could or could not eat. Cheese felt safe, so they went with that. It's probably totally bollocks, and it's much more likely to do with an Ashkenazi tradition in the 18th and 19th centuries. But that is that's less arresting as an explanation, so there you have it. My cheesecake worked out fairly well, and then I ended up taking it to work on Tuesday, where it was eventually eaten. So on Sunday morning, I woke up full of good intentions. I'd done all of my research and written down on a sheet of paper what synagogue services and church services I wanted to attend. I'd pre-torn my toilet paper, was armed with my Bible and my Talmud, and I trundled down to my local synagogue for the 9:15 service. This was the first time that I'd been in shul for this project, so I wanted to make it count. When I arrived, there was no one to greet me other than the security guard, who gave me the once-over and decided that I looked sufficiently Jewish to be let in. I wandered around for a bit, looking for the entrance, and on the way I found a pile of prayer books. I grabbed one on the off chance that it would be useful, which it was, and eventually found the right door. There were about 12 people in total in the hall at 9:15. The hall wouldn't fill properly until it was past 11 AM, so clearly people knew something that I did not. I flipped open my prayer book and looked at all the headings. All the services in the book, which was over 300 pages long, were for Shavuot, so just this festival. So, where were we now? Was it morning prayer, prayer for the first day of Shavuot, or something entirely different? The reader was mumbling in Hebrew, and occasionally the people present would mumble something back. Sometimes people would stand up and then sit down again. I manically flipped through this book. There was no indicators as to when the sitting and the standing were meant to happen, and the congregation were meant to say, speak or sing. I kept flipping, thinking to myself, I read Hebrew! For the love of God, I even understand Hebrew! It's only a matter of seconds before I find my place, and it'll all be fine. An hour later, I was still lost. As soon as I thought I knew where we were, it was gone again, and there was no one to help me. When the hall finally began to fill, a woman saw me looking nonplussed and took pity on me. She came over and said, I saw you sitting here on your own, and I remembered that I sat on my own for 6 months before anybody came over to help me. So I always make sure that people are okay. 6 months? Are you shitting me? I can't set foot in a church for more than 30 seconds before someone's pushing papers into my hand, asking me if I want a cup of tea and whether I'd like to chat to the vicar, which, by the way, is exactly what happened when I went into the parish church for the evening service. I slogged out the service, and eventually, with the help of my new friend, I found my place. She said, Oh, they always skip this bit. You need to be here every year to know that. The Torah was removed from its ark for the readings, and then ceremonially returned again. For me, that was the most interesting part, as it's visually striking, and it reminds us how seriously Jews take their holy book. And on Shavuot, this was, of course, even more important, as it was the book itself, in a way, that was being celebrated. At midday, when I thought I just could not take any more, the service was finally over, and everyone filed out. People were either going home for lunch, or to other people's for lunch. I wasn't about to try and get myself invited to a stranger's house, and in any case, I had Naomi at home from church at 1 PM. Only, she didn't come home from church. I had a little nap while I waited for her. And then I made some food, while being very careful not to light any new flames or anything. Then I read some Jewish laws. And then I read some Harry Potter. Then I felt guilty for reading Harry Potter, so I had another nap. The seconds ticked by, and eventually it came to 5 PM, and I decided to set out for church and the celebration of Pentecost. Now, I might have been switching religions, but I was still working under Jewish rules, so no driving and no public transport, presumably because I'm not allowed to use money, even though my Oyster card is annual, so I'm not actually paying for anything per se. So, I put my coat on and I headed over to Golders Green. On my way, I saw many of my Jewish compatriots milling back and forth from services. Some of them wished me Yom Tov, and I thought, aha, I pass as a Jew, which only made me feel guilty for being on my way to church. As I was walking, I realised two things. First, I didn't have any water with me, and I was walking about 3 miles and would then have to walk back. Second, in all of my excitement about Shavuot, I had completely failed to do any research or preparation for Pentecost. I knew literally nothing, so I would need to rely on the goodwill of the church congregants to help me out. Luckily, goodwill was abundant when I arrived, panting. "Would you like a tea or coffee?" the lady said, after furnishing me with a leaflet about service times. "Water!" I cried plaintively. Okay, maybe not quite. I was thirsty, but I hadn't forgotten my manners. After I felt a bit more normal, I explained that I was there for Pentecost and that I wanted to know more about it. I was duly directed to the vicar, who told me that it was a shame I hadn't come for the morning service, because that would have been a lot more related to what I was looking for. The evening service, he explained, was quite informal, which was mostly musical worship and a short talk. And then more music. However, he did say that Pentecost was a celebration of the Holy Spirit coming down to the apostles as they sat around wondering what to do after Jesus' resurrection and ascension. By the telling of it in Acts, they were quite lost, but then the Holy Spirit came down and they all got superpowers. Or That's at least how I was reading it anyway. They started talking every language, and very soon they were healing here, there, and everywhere. There's nothing quite like a good miracle to galvanise the troops, so it's quite a useful skill for the apostles to have. Joking aside, why is this important? Well, the whole Bible, up until now, has been split in two. The Old Testament is all about the Father, although obviously he's not called that in the text, and the second part, the Gospels, are all about Jesus, the Son. We need the Holy Spirit to make up the Trinity, the basic units of Christian belief. And that's really the first time that the Holy Spirit is specifically referred to, although you could argue that the third sentence of Genesis, which is the very first book of the Bible, also mentions it. It says, "And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters." Sounds like the Spirit that we know and love. Anyway, the Holy Spirit is explicitly present at the beginning of Acts, and this is where the Christian religion really began. The apostles went from a random group of followers of a man who died on a cross to being a social and religious movement, a force to be reckoned with, and they reckoned that they had the Holy Spirit with them and that meant they could do anything. Yee-haw! I was mildly concerned by the references to the Spirit as he, as I thought that the Holy Spirit was explicitly genderless. Catholic Exchange and others assure me that I'm wrong, but I worry that the pronouns start to suggest a bit of a sausage fest. Theologians try to argue that the Trinity is so far beyond our sad little gender categorizations that worrying about pronouns is moot, which it probably is. But, as humans, pronouns are important to us, and if we start using he for deities all the time, we're going to start to think of all of them as male, even if it's just the pronoun that we're declaring and not the underlying gender. I have a feeling that if I start using the Sikh convention of referring to God in plural, it wouldn't go down particularly well, but I might try it a couple of times as an experiment. Otherwise, what happened at church? There was a guitar, and there was a double bass, and some charismatic songs. I even know a few of them by now, so I can actually sing along. There was a bit of talk about the Holy Spirit being able to come to everyone at all times, although it's actually less about the Holy Spirit coming to us and more about us coming to them. See what I did there? My atheism is still finding these bits a bit hard to accept, but I did feel much more loved and appreciated as a human being than I'd done at the synagogue that morning. Then I walked home. Naomi was there, and we discussed how she wanted to tell me that she wasn't coming home for lunch, but there was no way for her to do it, given that my phone was off. On Monday, I slept quite a lot. First, there was nothing much to do, although I did read the rest of Acts, and some more of the Talmud. Second, I had a fairly nasty migraine, which for the first time in this project didn't mess up all of my plans. I wasn't allowed to do anything anyway. When I complained to Rivka that I was bored and didn't do well with the Yom Tov rules, she replied that I'm going about it the wrong way, and that I need to be more zen about the whole thing and just sit back and enjoy it. Maybe I should, but my brain doesn't like to do this. It's zooming around trying to tell me things, and I get especially frustrated when I'm meant to be studying, which I was during the festival, but I can't do it properly, as I don't have access to any of the further resources that I would want. I suppose the solution would have to be a complete library of Judaica, but clearly that's a wish for another life, one in which I'm maybe a bit more pious, and probably a lot less petulant.